EuroVelo 4 starts at the seaside town of Roscoff, but for the first 30 kilometers up to the small town of Morlaix, it follows the same route as EuroVelo 1, which I had conquered a few years ago. So I don't bother with this stretch via Saint-Paul-de-Léon, because the cumbersome transport of the bicycle to Morlaix has been taxing enough. There I leave the railway station above the town centre with its striking 60-meter high 19th century railway bridge and take a hotel. The next day my cycle tour begins with the Côte de Granit Rose. EuroVelo 4 crosses Europe from west to east. Starting point is Roscoff in the far west of Brittany. The destination is Kiev, the capital of Ukraine. In some respects, one could say that although it runs 200 kilometers further north, it runs parallel to the EuroVelo 6. In other words, parallel to that European cycle route which goes from the mouth of the Loire to the Black Sea. However, the character of EuroVelo 4 is completely different, and so are the demands on the cyclist. While EuroVelo 6 always follows rivers, EuroVelo 4 is characterized by diverse landscapes. Not only rivers, but steep coasts, wide plains and mountain ranges. The diversity of its landscapes reflects a Europe that will hopefully have a future without borders. The Breton coast northeast of Morlaix welcomes me with a bright blue sky, a strong easterly wind and lots of steep hills. After endless cool downpours, a particularly stable high-pressure area lies over Western and Central Europe from mid-May. It gives me a good 4 weeks of sunny weather without a drop of rain until I reach Ostend. It is really worth the constant headwind. The headwind makes the hills steeper and higher. It is almost as bad as in Wales, and that really says it. On the road, I meet a German couple on their bikes who complain bitterly about the many climbs, even though they are traveling on e-bikes. However, there are very few cyclists on tour here. Despite the beauty of the landscape, that is not surprising. My first destination for the day is Lannion, and I soon realize that I have been overconfident. In the French cycling guide, the stage was labeled with 3 bikes, the highest level of difficulty. I didn't take this very seriously. That was a mistake. It feels like the Vélomaritime not only climbs every hill, but also doesn't miss a single bay. Fortunately, the last part of the route runs a little further from the coast on a country road. Nevertheless, I arrive just before sunset and have only covered 70 kilometers. I have to postpone my visit to the church of Brelevinès until the next morning. Situated on a steep hill, the church originally belonged to the Templars and features both Romanesque and Gothic style elements. As it is already evident that I have planned a too long trip for tomorrow, I cycle directly from Lannion to the Côte de Granit Rose in a northeasterly direction. I reach the sea at the Mine Russe lighthouse in the village of Plumanac. The Côte de Granit Rose stretches from Trébadeur to Perros-Guirec and is characterized by its weathered pink granite boulders, which come in bizarre rounded shapes. To the east of Perros-Guirec, the Vélomaritime runs a little further inland from the coast. There, the hills are not quite as numerous or as steep, but you could never call it a coastal plain. I spend the night in the village of Pleubière. Before I reach it, I visit Tréquier. Again situated on a hill with its picturesque old town and the cathedral of Saint-Tuctual. The following day, I returned to the coast via Les Adrieux and Paimpol. Along the Côte de Guillot and the Côte de Penthièvre, the Vélomaritime runs very close to the coast the whole way, only turning slightly inland again near Saint-Malo. Meanwhile, I know what a slog the coastal cycle paths are and have chosen shorter stages. I stay overnight near Saint-Brieuc, Les Valandrés and Saint-Cast-le-Guildo. The scenery along the route is exceptionally beautiful. However, there is not a continuous cycle path, but stretches on country roads and dedicated cycle paths alternate. Sometimes I also cycle on former railway tracks. The Abbey de Beaupont near Paimpol and the landscape around Cap Fréhel are particularly impressive. The abbey was built in the High Middle Ages and originally belonged to the Premonstratensian order. It was plundered and devastated and is now privately owned. At Cap Fréhel, the Atlantic Ocean lashes against the cliffs, and the heath landscape with its many spring flowers repeatedly presents picture book views over towering cliffs and small bays. There's one photo opportunity after another, but of course I hardly cover any distance. Anyway, it gives me more time to admire the great sights. To the east of Saint-Cast-le-Guildo, the Velómaritime leads me back inland. It bypasses the congested bridge over to Saint-Malo and crosses the Bassin de la Rance further south at Plouer-sur-Rance. This leg is a joy to cycle, and the hills are not so steep. The route along the eastern shore of the Bassin de la Rance is very scenic. It follows small country roads directly along the coast. Not only do I pass small idyllic villages and magnificent aristocratic residences, but also the La Rance tidal power station. It was built in 1967 and remained the largest one in the world for 40 years. I reach Saint-Malo, the granite citadel, on Whit Saturday in almost summery weather. All the hotels are accordingly full and tourists crowd every place. The granite didn't help against the Allied bomber fleets that targeted the city during the Second World War, because it had been turned into a fortress by German troops. 80% of the buildings were destroyed, but have since been rebuilt and restored to their former glory. Particularly worth seeing are the grey city walls and the rebuilt Saint-Vincent's Cathedral. From Saint-Malo, I take another shortcut. I don't cycle to Cancale, following the Vélomaritime, but head straight for Mont St Michel. Because of the Whitsun holidays, accommodation is a problem and I have to make do with the Vessi, about 20 kilometers south of the famous monastery mountain. Fortunately, this time the route takes me through a really flat coastal plain. Shortly before Pontorson, I cross the border between Brittany and Normandy. Mont St Michel originally belonged to Brittany, but now belongs to Normandy due to the relocation of the river. Les couillons dans sa folie, Millimont et Normandie. In addition to Normandy and Brittany, the Hauts-de-France region was also involved in the planning and realization of the Vélomaritime. At the end of 2018, the three regions founded a cycle route committee together with other partners. Its task was to plan and design the first stage of EuroVelo 4. This stage is almost 1,500 kilometers long. It is by far the longest in any of the 7 countries the EuroVelo 4 crosses. Some of the ideas of the French-British partnership for the Tour de Manche were also integrated. The Vélomaritime is not quite as well developed as its somewhat shorter counterpart, the Vélo on the west coast of France. Due to the many and often very steep climbs, you have to put in some effort to cycle it. However, the Vélomaritime is also much more interesting and varied. The medieval town centers, the landing sites in Normandy, the historic towns on the English Channel, and the magnificent cliffs are undoubtedly worth the many steep hills. There is not yet a cycle route guide for the Vélomaritime in German, but there is a book in French that is similar to the bike line tour guides. For me, it has 2 major disadvantages. My French is too poor to understand the description of the sites, and, unlike the bike cycle guides, the French Velo guide does not include contour lines. Fortunately, there's still a very good official version of the Vélomaritime cycle guide on the internet. This is also made available in German and English by the tourism organizations involved. I have reserved a whole day for the visit of Mont St Michel. First, I have to cycle 15 kilometers to reach it. The journey goes via Pontorson. 3 kilometers before Mont St Michel, all cars and buses have to stop. Only shuttle buses, pedestrians and cyclists are allowed to continue. Cyclists have only enjoyed this privilege for some years, and it is also subject to a few restrictions. You can't use your bike inside the castle hill, but there is a bicycle parking space near the entrance. Although it is a Whit Monday, the morning rush of tourists to France's most famous World Heritage Site is still limited. I have the distinct impression that the over-tourism here is not yet as bad as in Santorini or Venice. The 3-story complex is also surprisingly spacious, so that I am almost alone in some of the halls. But maybe I'm just lucky that day and my visit corresponds with the peak meal times. I only visit the Mont St Michel at low tide, but the views from the various chapels, churches and courtyards are impressive and unique. The glorious spring day with its balmy breeze adds to this. The magic of the place is evident, even if you don't believe in the legend of the invisible line that stretches from Scheldt Michael to the Carmel Monastery in Israel. The line of the invisible sword is more or less correct, but only on a map of Europe or using an atlas. If you use a globe, which would actually be appropriate, you are looking at a scimitar. After a wonderful day at Mont St Michel, I set off the next morning in the direction of the Cotentin Peninsula in good spirit. The weather is fine, and for the very first time on the Vélomaritime, the landscape is perfectly flat, just as a coastal plain should be. Yet it is here that the cycle path takes me further inland in France than at any other point in its 1,500 kilometers. This is because the west coast of Cotentin is skipped by the Vélomaritime. My first day's destination on the peninsula, Martin-Bocage, is almost 50 kilometers from the coast. Surprisingly, the cycle paths here are particularly well developed. They are car-free for almost the entire route and often run on former railway lines. From Martin-Bocage, I set off in 3 days stages to Utah Beach, the westernmost landing beach of the Allies during the Second World War. The Vélomaritime takes me via the small towns of Vire, Saint-Lô and Cotentin. The nice flat terrain soon ends, and the hills become almost as steep as in Brittany. From time to time I can travel on riverbanks, but mostly there are steep descents and climbs. Not even the many flower-filled meadows can sweeten this travail. The impressive viaduct of LeHavre, designed by Gustave Eiffel, is a good example. It is rebuilt into a single large play and fun facility, so driving over it is not an option. It goes steeply down into the valley and just as steeply back up again. I reached the small town of Saint-Lô the following day. The town with its cathedral was 95% destroyed during Operation Overlord and seized by the Allies 2 months after the landing. From here on, the weather gets steadily worse. It is not raining, but it is windy, quite cool and very cloudy. It also looks like rain all the time. A French cyclist I meet a few days later tells me that the Cotentin Peninsula is notorious for its bad weather. So I skipped the northern part of Cotentin around the harbour town of Cherbourg and head directly east to Utah Landing Beach. Here the weather is even in a real stormy mood. But the Americans are in a celebratory mood. They are driving around in old jeeps and other military vehicles, celebrating the 79th anniversary of D-Day, the landing of the Allied air, land and sea forces in Normandy. These celebrations last 2 weeks from the end of May to the beginning of June. They come with parades, wreath-laying ceremonies and regional festivals and celebrations. I encounter these again and again over the next 3 days as I slowly make my way from Utah Beach to Sword Beach near Caen. From Utah Beach, I cycle directly to Omaha Beach, the second major landing site for the US troops. To the east of Gold Landing Beach, where mainly British troops arrived, I stay overnight near the small coastal town of Port-à-Bassin-Hupin for 2 days. My main purpose is a detour to Bayeux. The famous town is only 10 kilometers from the coast, but nevertheless ignored by the Vélomaritime. As I have never been there before, I want to visit Notre Dame Cathedral. The current building dates back to the High Middle Ages and was built in the Gothic style. It survived the Second World War without major damage. I also visit the Musée de la Tapisserie, where the Bayeux tapestry is on display. It is 68 meters long and shows 58 individual scenes. Before cycling back to the coast, I find out all about the Allied landings in Normandy during the Second World War at the Musée de la Bataille de Normandie. The following day, I am faced with the problem that there's still a gap in the Vélomaritime. In other words, there's no proper cycle route across the Loire estuary to LeHavre. The Vélomaritime pages in the internet say laconically, the section from Honfleur to LeHavre is not safe enough for cyclists and therefore suggest using a bus with bicycle transport. You have to book in advance in French. So I make a different choice. I continue cycling along the coast, Ansford Beach, to the Orne estuary. There I take the well-maintained cycle path that leads south along the Canal de Caen à la Mer to the city of Caen. In Caen, I take a whole leisurely day for sightseeing. I visit the LeHavre, Cathedral, Old Town and the Château de Caen. The extensive castle of Caen was built in 1060 on the orders of William the Conqueror. It is one of the biggest fortifications in Europe. It also houses several interesting museums. The next day I take a regional train and travel directly to LeHavre via Rouen. I leave LeHavre station in the early afternoon and start cycling towards the LeHavre. LeHavre, the city with the second largest harbour in France, was also almost completely destroyed in the Second World War and then rebuilt in concrete architecture. Nevertheless, the city received a World Heritage Award. Well, what to say? LeHavre is located on the Alabaster coast, which stretches as far as Triport just before the mouth of the Somme. This steep coast, which attracts many tourists, has unpleasant side effects for the cyclists on the Vélomaritime. Very similar to the coast in Brittany, it implies steep hills. The gradients are considerable. I cover the almost 200 kilometers from LeHavre to Le Tréport in 4 legs. I spent the night in Étretat, Voillats-sur-Mer, Dieppe and Arrest in the Bay of Somme. The destination of my first day's stage, Étretat, is framed on both sides by towering cliffs. Fortunately, I'm here out of season. Anyway, I can't get a room for less than 100 euros. But the crowds are still limited. There hasn't been any fishing here for a long time. It is all being replaced by mass tourism. On the next stage, I experience even more of the impressive cliffs in Fécamp and Voillats-sur-Mer. In Fécamp, I admire the Palais Benedictine, where the herbal liquor of the same name is distilled. I then cycle further east via the town's 3 harbours and reach Voilet-sur-Mer in the evening. The tourist season hasn't even started here, and I have the beach and the cliffs almost to myself. A gusty wind blows the next morning. I make a few video shots in Saint-Valery-en-Caen and then cycle on to Vieux-les-Roses. The village of 500 inhabitants was named one of the most beautiful villages in France in 2017 and boasts another record too. The Voie, which flows into the sea here, is the shortest river in France, measuring 1159 meters. This leg ends in Dieppe. After climbing a lot of hills, there is a consolatory conclusion. Coming from the plateau of the cliffs, you enter the town with a wonderful view of the castle and the harbour of Dieppe. The following day I reached Tréport and its neighbouring town of Mea-les-Bains. The Alabaster coast ends with this twin town and comes to a worthy conclusion with the highest chalk cliffs in Europe at 110 meters. Here too there are beautiful views of the harbour and town centre.
Ik weet wel dat dat er is. Welke kant dat van?
As I cycle east of Dieppe towards the Somme delta, I finally return to an area that is flat and can rightly be described as a coastal plain. There are also plenty of tourists here, even a lot of cyclists. The accommodation in Saint-Valery-sur-Somme is so expensive that I prefer to stay in a small village 10 kilometers away, on the periphery of the delta. From the mouth of the Somme, 4 legs take me to the French-Belgian border at Bray-de-Dune. There are still a few climbs to conquer, especially in the Cap Gris area. However, this is nothing compared to the Alabaster coast and only affects a small part of the route. Leaving the Somme, I first cycle to Berck. Before I reach the town with its sandy beaches, I cross the extensive nature reserves and bird sanctuaries in the eastern bay of the Somme. This route is very beautiful, but I don't meet many cyclists. From Berck, where I get the impression that the season is still a long way off, I continue to Boulogne-sur-Mer. There is a strange coastal fog right by the sea. But not further inland. Not far from Berck, near Étaples, I visit one of the largest military cemeteries of the First World War. More than 10,000 fallen soldiers are buried here. The next morning, the coastal fog has lifted from the seaside of Boulogne-sur-Mer. I first stroll through the harbour and then cycle off towards Calais. I visit another large British military cemetery and then cycle along coastal paths to the Cap Gris. On a clear day, you can see England from the Cape of the Grey Nose. as this is the narrowest point of the English Channel at 33 kilometers. On this day, however, visibility is too poor. In Calais, the capital of the Opal Coast, I take a short stroll through the town and have a look at the LeHavre, the town hall, and, in front of it, the monument of the citizens of Calais by Auguste Breton. The last stage on the Vélomaritime takes me via Dunkerque to the French-Belgian border. Dunkerque is part of a pretty ugly industrial area, but at least there are a few dedicated cycle paths, although they usually run 2 to 3 kilometers from the coast. In many places I can see piles of shopping carts and small groups of migrants moving along the highways. After the dissolution of the Calais jungle, the center of irregular migration shifted to Dunkerque. French critics see England as responsible for this because its economic model creates a high demand for jobs in the informal sector. I tend to agree. From Dunkerque, I cycle through a beautiful dune landscape. The path is car-free and I don't notice any border. That's how it should be in Europe.